Okay, so my topic was topic 7, and I had the competence to be executed and participate in waive appeals. So essentially, what I'm going to talk about today is how we decide a defendant's competence on whether or not they can be executed um, in capital cases. So the first thing I included in my presentation was information about Ted Bundy. In a lot of videos and documentaries that we see kind of really how smart he was and how understanding he was. He really did know the court process, and he actually was in the process of trying to become a lawyer when he was arrested. So based off all of this, a lot of people really believed that he was competent to understand that he was facing the death penalty, that he was potentially going to get the electric chair. And I found this really short, like 2-minute video, which is in the community forum if you want to watch that. So in execution cases, the one thing that you have to be aware of is that not every mental illness means that a person is not competent, as we learned in module 2. The reason why we test for competency is because of the Ford v. Wainwright case that was originally in 1974 when Ford had committed murder, but those years leading up to it, that's when he developed a mental illness, which is why the Supreme Court then changed the ruling because, as it states in the book, it is cruel and unusual punishment to execute a mentally ill person. So the Supreme Court had to change it so that you could test for competency and you could make sure that they were able to understand what they were being charged with and what the punishment would be. One big thing in doing evaluations for competency in capital cases is there are a lot of debates on evaluations and how defendants are evaluated. And what I mean by that is looking at the effectiveness of how they are examined and whether or not it's a true testament to their competency. Some of the questions are a little bit flawed. There is obviously always the risk for bias in a clinician's opinion. That's why it's also important to focus on recent mental health issues and not focus on anything, maybe not anything, but not to focus heavily on past mental health issues, but rather their symptoms and how they're acting in that current time. Once again, the reason why we do this is because we want to make sure that people are able to understand what they're being charged with and that they can comprehend the potential punishment, because you don't want them to be executed, obviously, if they're not able to understand what they're being charged with and not able to understand what the punishment could be. So the first media source, I did a couple. There are a lot of news articles on this topic. It is a really important thing for us to look at. The first one here just talks about how each state and how different judges are going to have different ways of handling whether or not they believe someone should be tested for competency, just because not every case is going to have a part in the trial where a judge or the defense team or the prosecution believes that the defendant is incompetent. So every case is different and every judge is going to be different on if they even agree to have them be evaluated, or even because in a lot of execution cases, like with Ted Bundy, he did defend himself. So there's always going to be a difference in how everybody does things. The second source that I found was the article from 1989 that discussed how this all came to be, how this all happened based off the Ford v. Wainwright case. So, discussing the Supreme Court and its decisions to change how we evaluate and how we look at competency in those who are in capital cases and soon to be put on death row and or executed. So I did a couple of discussion questions. I think with this kind of topic, I think that there is just a lot that everybody has different opinions on. So I did a couple. My first one is, why do you think it's important to test the competency of death row inmates before execution? My second one is, do you think these inmates' competence should be tested during trial or after they receive a death sentence? With the Ford v. Wainwright case, he didn't get tested for competency until nearly 8+ years after he had been sentenced to death and found guilty of the crime. So a lot of people might think it's irrelevant when that happens, or some people also might have the opinion that it's happening because of the charge that they were given and what they were sentenced to. And my third and final discussion question is, with what we know about mental illnesses not always meaning incompetence, do you think more defense lawyers should avoid using the insanity plea for execution cases? So what I mean by this is just looking at, should it always go to using the insanity plea, or should we really actually hold those accountable if they're not suffering from a mental illness, if it's not always just, or, if it's just a mental illness that doesn't cause them to be incompetent. And then these are all of my sources, and that is it. So now